Hey everyone, Ashendor here. Today I'm going to be talking about deck building in Duelyst, and then later on in the video I'm also going to talk about how you go about acquiring new cards for your collection so that you actually can build your own decks. Now I'm going to go into the collection screen just to kind of give a view of how this is all laid out. Along the top you can see cards divided into the 6 factions unique card sets, and then the set of neutral minions that can be played in basically any deck. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring up just a new deck here to kind of illustrate how this process works. We'll call this new deck test. Now, the first choice you're going to be responsible for making is choosing which faction you want to play and which general from that faction you want to use. Each faction has 2 different generals, each of which has a unique Bloodborne spell. So, for example, the general I've been playing in my videos so far is Kalios, who uses teleportation. I could also have chosen to play as Reva Eventide, still being a Onyxhai deck, slightly different general, whose ability allows her to summon a Heartseeker, which is a 1/1 ranged minion. Now, depending on what kind of deck you're thinking about playing, or which general you particularly like, there will be kind of a different emphasis on how significantly the general affects your card choices. Kalios does kind of emphasize, positional play and high mobility, but there's a variety of Onyxhai variants you can toss him into and have it still be, pretty effective. Teleportation is almost always a good ability to have. By contrast, somebody like Cassiva, because of the way her ability works, it really emphasizes wanting to play her along with other cards that utilize the Shadow Creep mechanic. So typically Abyssian generals, depending on which one you're playing, are pursuing very different strategies, either Shadow Creep related effects or some sort of Swarm Deathwatch kind of thing. So again, it varies how much the choice of a general or the choice of a deck strategy affects the other side of the equation, so to speak. So for this test deck, I'm going to go ahead and just pick Fey Bloodwing, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of how you go about putting cards. So you can see it's brought up this secondary screen here where the cards I select for the deck are going to slowly build out this list. I'm just going to pick a few at random here to illustrate. Now you can see how it will show which cards you've selected and how many you've selected for your deck. Right now, you have to play exactly a 40-card deck, including your general, no more, no less, and the maximum number of copies of a single card you can have is 3. Unlike some other games of this type, Duelyst does not have anything like unique creatures where you can only play a singleton copy of them in a deck, so anything that is available except for generals you can play up to 3 copies of. Now, once you've got things filled out, you'll also see this sort of chart at the top that is illustrating the mana curve of your deck. In other words, how many cards in your deck cost 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, and so on. This is basically a planning tool so that you can try to evaluate, whether your deck is too cheap and doesn't have enough late game threats, or whether it's too expensive and you're not going to have enough to do early on in the game, things of that nature. There are really no hard rules, in my opinion, for how your curve should look, but in general, you're not going to want to have, like, a ton of 1-cost cards and nothing at 4, just because of the way that the deck or the game kind of balances mana cost by making more expensive things, generally speaking, progressively more powerful. Now, I'm actually going to bail out of this test deck and bring up one that I've been working on, because what I'd like to do is take the deck that I was playing in my latter videos, make some tweaks to it to address some of the concerns I have about the deck, and then make a secondary video here in the future showing me playing the revamped deck on the ladder and kind of comparing how well it does after the tweaks to how well it did before. So, I've been playing a deck that is alternately called Stabhai or Onyxhai, and I've built a copy of it that I can just mess around with without losing my initial deck list. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the rework list. Now, I'm playing Kalios, and the strategy that I had selected for this deck, the way that I was planning to win the game, was basically a 2-part strategy. Early on, I want to drop down fairly, I don't want to say efficient, but cheap minions that have the backstab ability, or that offer some sort of other consequence-free combat. In other words, so like Key Beholder, which is ranged, or even to a certain extent Lantern Fox. The idea being that I can output damage while still maintaining assets on the board. In other words, because of Backstab's ability to deal damage without counterattacks, or ranged abilities, or ranged creatures' ability to do damage without counterattacks, I can try to control the board early on without losing a whole lot of my own creatures. Then I just kind of want to stall through the mid game. I don't have a lot of raw power, kind of in the middle here. Lantern Fox is capable of outputting a lot of damage, but it typically will not close out a game in and of itself. And then late game, I want to drop either a Hamon Bladeseeker to basically just crash into them and try to kill them very quickly with an 8/8, or if I've still maintained some of my early minions on the board, an Onyx Jaguar to start building up basically a swarm army. And I'm also running a single copy of Spiral Technique just to close out games in situations where my opponent has been able to get away from my minions or clear the board or something else, and I need to deal those last few critical points of damage. Now, in the games that I was playing on the ladder, there were a few things that came up that I wasn't really happy with. I made an initial version of this video that went extremely long where I tried to break down like every single card choice that was going into this deck, and I realized that was probably just a little bit too boring for most people to want to sit through. So instead, I'm just going to address the specific points that I thought really needed some improvement and explain why I'm changing those specific things out. So to start with, right off the bat, I've been playing Nashor in this deck for a little over 10 games, maybe a few more I think, and I have yet to be in a situation where I thought that playing Nashor was the correct choice, which tells me that he probably needs to go. The reason he's in here at all is because I need some way of dealing AoE damage to deal with basically swarm minions. There's a couple decks where the swarm is really a concern. One is certain Abyssian decks, which are generating a whole lot of very low toughness, but a lot of low toughness minions. I have not seen a lot of those on the ladder of late, so it's actually less of a concern right now. The other type is Vitruvian decks, who are generating a lot of dervishes. And I have been playing against Vitruvian so much lately that that's really my concern. Dervishes from Vitruvian, depending on their particular flavor, are usually 2/2s, and then they have certain cards that will buff them up, but really it's a swarm of 2/2s that this kind of card is supposed to deal with. The problem is that Nashor is at basically a weird cost point, and without using an Inner Focus to activate him immediately, he is probably pretty easy to play around. So I'm not super thrilled with him. I'm going to go ahead and cut both copies of Nashor and just make a note that we need to add in some sort of additional swarm clearing. What else wasn't I very happy with? Well, a lot of these cards I think are correct. I'm pretty happy with the general theme. I will say that I was not incredibly happy with Kaido Assassin as a 2-drop, and that's partly just because, you know, he's a very basic 2-drop. He's not supposed to be particularly exciting, but I can't point to a lot of situations in the games I was playing where his ability to, you know, occasionally backstab really paid off as a regard in comparison to playing a different 2-drop that maybe had some additional utility. So I'm actually going to go ahead and cut Kaido Assassin for right now. I've really enjoyed Shiro Puppy Dragon, and he's actually a pretty interesting card choice in this deck for a number of reasons, but I'm not certain that I need all 3 copies of him. There have been times where I'll draw him and kind of look at the board state, and there's just not enough going on to make his ability worth the trade-off of him only having 1 attack. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 1 copy of Shiro for right now. So if you look at my mana curve here, with those cuts, I'm down to 3 copies of Katara, and then 2 copies of Shiro, for only 5 minions that I could potentially play on turn 1 as player 1, which is really lower than I would like. I would ideally like to have at least 8 or 9 drops that I could play on that first turn. So the second choice we're going to want to make is, what additional early drops should I add to the deck that would maybe be more effective than Kaido Assassin? The third choice I want to reevaluate here is the mix of in-game threats I have. Spiral Technique is occasionally MVP of the deck, but a lot of times it's just a card that I replace a lot. And so although I do think it definitely has earned its spot here, I'm wondering if maybe there's some alternate cards we could look at that would maybe be more effective. Particularly because I'm probably only going to run 1 copy of it, which makes it a little inconsistent. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And then I'm also going to think about the balance between Hamon Bladeseeker and Onyx Jaguar, because I'm not certain that I like the 2 Hamon and 3 Jaguar anymore. Really, I'm only running Onyx Jaguar because I really like the design of the card. If he was 4 mana, he would be phenomenal. At 5, he's almost a little bit too expensive for the slot in the deck that I'm giving him, but he has provided enough value in a lot of games that I think it's worthwhile to keep at least a couple copies of him. So I'm actually going to cut one copy of him right now and leave these at 2 each, and maybe come back to that at the very end. So let's take these in order. First up, we want to talk about swarm clearing AoE kind of damage. What options do I have available to me as a Kalios Songhai deck? Cutting through here, the first option that comes up is Ghost Lightning, which is a spell, which is nice, in that it doesn't rely on me keeping a minion on the board. I can just play it and have it take effect. It does 1 damage to all enemy minions. Here's the problem. At 1 damage, it's not enough to clear the Dervish swarms, which for the most part will have at least 2 health, if not more, which means I would either need to be playing multiples of these in a turn, or some sort of other spell-related effect like Crescent Spear to give me more damage. If I was playing what's generally called a spell high deck, which it revolves, as the name would suggest, where I'm playing a whole lot of spells and other cards that benefit from playing spells, that would make a lot of sense maybe. But since I'm really focusing more on positional play and then smashing people's faces in with Haman, it's not going to synergize well with the rest of my deck. So I'm going to pass on Ghost Lightning for now. Now, what I was originally playing in that AoE clear spot was Battle Pando, which is a 2/4 for 3, and whenever it takes damage, deals 1 damage to all enemies, including the general. This is nice in the sense that it makes Battle Pando functionally a 3/4 for 3, and can potentially, if you manage to keep him alive, deal that damage to, a lot of, over and over again. So you can potentially, hit things for 2, 3, even 4 damage, depending on how the combat goes. So this is actually a pretty good choice, I think. The problem was that when I was running him, very rarely did it come up that he actually got full value. He'll either get dispelled, or he'll just get killed in 1 shot, or removed in some other way. And unless you have an inner focus ready to allow him to get 1 hit off, he typically will just basically be taken care of instantly without a whole lot of value. And again, since he only does 1 damage per hit, we would really only realistically expect to be able to hit everything once, which means he's still not going to do enough damage to take out the 2 health dervishes that I'm really concerned about. So I think I like this guy still more than Nashor, but possibly not enough to make him worthwhile. If we continue to move through here, Twin Strike. Twin Strike is another spell like Ghost Lightning that deals 2 damage to exactly 2 random enemy minions, and it also draws you a card to replace it. So this is something that I think actually has some potential here, because dervishes are, typically 2 health. Pax is a very commonly played Vitruvian card right now that when it dies spawns 2 of the dervishes. So this strikes me as kind of a fun answer to a lot of those dervish generating things. The problem is the 2 minions you hit are randomly selected from all the enemy minions on the board, which means that if there's like 4 minions on there and one of them is like a 6 health obelisk, inevitably this thing is going to ping the minions I did not want to attack and will just leave the things it could have killed alone. It does draw me a card, which is nice. The other thing is that if the opponent only has a single creature on the board, I can't even play this. There has to be at least 2 minions. I can't even just cycle it for the extra card. So I think this makes more sense than Ghost Lightning, certainly, and might make more sense than Battle Pando. And I kind of do want to try it, but I'm going to keep looking and see if there's something even better farther along. Now, really, there's not a whole lot of other swarm clearing effects that we can look at here. Pandemonium is an adorable spell that should never be played. And I think that's pretty much it that's in faction, unfortunately. So we're going to go into the neutral minions and see if there's something in here that would be more effective. Now, a lot of these, there are several neutral minions that allow you to do like targeted damage to a specific minion that would help with board clear, like Maw. That's not really what I'm looking at. I'm looking for a mass clear of some kind. Blistering Scorn is one of my favorite cards, and when I was running into a lot of Abyssian swarms, it was phenomenal. It's also very good against Magmar decks that play a lot of Rebirth minions, because it can kill eggs very effectively. Unlike Battle Pando, Blistering Scorn does the 1 damage when it comes into play, so you're guaranteed to get that damage. It also deals 1 damage to everything instead of just enemies, which is bad in the sense that it might kill your own stuff, but good in the sense that it will ping Lantern Fox and generate a Phoenix Fire for you. So Blistering Scorn's definitely a strong contender, but again, it's just 1 damage. And unlike Battle Pando, you don't have the way of, like, continuing to generate additional pings. It's just the one and done. So if the latter was looking a little bit different than it currently is, if I was seeing more Abyssian and more Magmar rebirth effects, I think this would be my pick. But against the seemingly never-ending Vitruvian menace that I keep running into, I'm not certain that it's really going to cut it. So let's leave that for now. What else is there even available? Well, not much here, not much there. I think that the next thing we can look at would be up here. We've got Nashor, right? Nashor makes logical sense, except in practice he just wasn't paying off. We have Frostbone Naga, which is quite honestly a contender. It deals 2 damage to everything around it when it comes into play, which means it could definitely be very useful about clearing large minion swarms. The problem is it hits everything, much like Scorn, which means it's going to hit all my crap too if I play it nearby anything. And unfortunately, a lot of things like, like Key Beholder or, well, honestly, that might not be a terrible choice. A lot of my significant threats have pretty high health. I want to come back to this, actually. I find this idea interesting. What else have I got? I could play Lightbender for an AoE Dispel, but again, that doesn't really answer my main problem, which is actually killing things. I could play Beastmaster for Frenzy. Kind of makes sense. I could play Sunset Paragon, which runs into a similar problem as Frostbone Naga, which is that it affects my stuff as well. If that wasn't 5 mana, I think it would probably be my choice, but I'm already kind of stuffed at 5 mana. So, I'm going to stop babbling on about the AoE damage here and just make a choice. What I'm really trying to illustrate here is that there are a variety of things to consider for any role that you need in your deck. And this is only after like 1 major expansion, right? A few future expansions in, I can't imagine the amount of variety we'll have available. But each of them typically has some trade-offs that you'll have to consider. So what I think I'm going to go with right now is actually duck back into Songhai, and I'm going to run a couple copies of Twin Strike and just see how it goes. It's possible that it will be, a dead card a lot of the time, but honestly, with only 2 copies of Onyx Bear Seal, I don't mind having some additional point removal. So let's just play a couple copies of that and click save. Now, the other thing I want to do was early 2-drops. I'm going to save you the detailed analysis of all the different options that are available to me, and just say that I've been curious about an interaction between Onyx Jaguar and Tuskboar. Tuskboar is the card that, if you watched my latter video, a lot of Songhai decks are running in conjunction with Mirror Meld and various buffs to generate just like a lot of insane damage out of hand. I don't have that combo engine in this deck right now, but I'm curious about whether being able to run Tuskboar, just a couple copies of it, makes sense as a kind of utility card, particularly if I'm able to get an Onyx Jaguar on board. So I'm going to give a couple copies right there, and we'll just see how it goes. The problem with Tuskboar is that because it returns to your hand at the beginning of your turn, you can't effectively use it as your initial play for taking the mana tile on turn 2. In other words, you play this thing, it can take a mana tile that turn, but it can't hang around and take one on the following turn to give you the initial boost. Which means that I really only still have 5 copies of an early threat that I can play that can still take a mana tile. So I need a few more to go along with these. I am going to go ahead and jump into neutral minions, and I'm going to play a couple copies of Healing Mystic. I'm not 100% certain that this card is going to really fit well with the deck, but I have a theory that by playing it along with Lantern Fox, with Wings of Paradise, with Hamon, that it will be useful for maintaining momentum late game by healing up my real threats, but also be useful in that I can just drop it on the first turn and it will just be a 2-3 and that's fine. It remains to be seen whether this is actually all that worthwhile compared to just playing Kaido Assassin. The other trade-off I'm making here is that Killing Edge is a buff spell that also draws me a card if it's played on something that has Backstab. The first version of this deck ran, I believe, let me count, at least 9 cards with Backstab. I am now down to 3, which, now that I'm thinking about it, has actually strayed somewhat from the initial strategy of the deck, which is fine. It's perfectly fine for a deck to evolve as you think about it and as you learn from experience, but because I have so fewer targets that will get me that extra card, I am reducing my ability to maintain pressure or maintain momentum by not running out of cards. So that's just something to be aware of. And if that does end up being a problem, I'll need to either add additional card draw beyond Sworn Sister and the Lantern Fox engine, or I will need to swap back out for more backstab minions so I can get more value out of Killing Edge. Let's see, so I've got 2, 4, 7 things that I can play turn 1, and then a couple Tusk Boars. I've got 2 cards left, and I wanted to address my balance of late game threats. Now, I had 3 copies of Onyx Jaguar. I often felt like that was a little bit too many. I often felt like I had a Jaguar in hand and then I'd draw another Jaguar, or that I would just have an opening hand of 2, and there's just no practical way to play those. So I feel like 2 is probably about the right number. The question now is whether I want to add in a 3rd copy of Haman, whether I want to add an additional singleton threat or 2 singleton threats, or add in 2 copies of an additional late game threat. The way I think I am going to do this, let's take a look through Songhai's heavy hitters later on. I've got Haman, obviously, which would be pretty fun. Onyx Jaguar. Grandmaster Zendo is very interesting. If you're not familiar with how battle pets work, basically at the start of your turn, all the battle pet creatures that you control make their movement and attack decisions based on an AI. You don't have any direct control over them, and they do their thing before you can move any of your other minions or play any spells. Grandmaster Zendo makes the enemy general behave in that manner, which means you can do things like drop a backstab minion directly behind them, and then play Grandmaster, and they will attack directly into the backstab minion, taking bonus damage. You can also do things like drop a Haman Bladeseeker right next to them, and they will be like, oh, I should attack Haman, and take a damage they probably would have preferred to avoid. So I actually was running Grandmaster in this deck for a little while. I am not confident that with the current design he really holds his weight, and at 6 mana I don't think he has enough impact on the board to really warrant his presence. But he is a lot of fun, so we might reconsider that. I could just run 2 copies of Spiral Technique and just be ready to burn somebody, which I kind of like the idea of. But what I'd really like to do is go into the heavy hitters on the neutral minion side and see if there's something that makes a lot of sense as an additional late game threat. I could run Archon Spellbinder, which I have run previously in Songhai decks as kind of a finisher. He's 7/7 for 6, and he slows down the opponent's ability to play spells, which can be very effective, actually. I'm gonna keep that in mind, I think. What else have I got available? I could drop Jack's True Sight, which I really like the idea of in conjunction with an Onyx Jaguar. The problem is, if the opponent has any kind of major board clear, any kind of AoE damage, these things get slaughtered pretty easily. But I really haven't run into a whole lot of AoE lately, so this actually kind of makes some sense. And with Onyx Jaguar, I think it could be pretty disgusting if they're able to keep even a couple of them alive for even a turn. So I'm gonna go ahead and play a copy of Jack's True Sight and see how that goes. And then, I think that I actually want to go back, and since I'm trying out the Tusk Boars and I'm trying out Jack's True Sight, I'm going to go back and add back in that 3rd copy of Onyx Jaguar, just so I can make sure that I can play it reliably, so that I can get a sense of how well these other cards work with it. So, that is the reworked Onyxhai deck. We made a few changes to it, kept the general structure of the deck the same. So in a follow-on video, I will take this deck on the ladder and see whether the specific changes we made end up paying off, or we're basically just, weakening the deck. So I'm going to go ahead and click save, and we'll leave that for now. The last thing I want to talk about in this video today is how you go about building up your own collection. There are essentially 3 ways to do so. The first way, if you're a new player, is through the starter decks. Excuse me, not through the starter decks, through each faction's basic cards. Basically, as you basically basic cards. As you level up in experience with each of the factions, you can see here 13 to 13 cards unlocked, you will slowly unlock a different, a specific set of cards for each one. If I go back into the collection screen here, Duelyst uses a rarity system that, as far as I can tell, has basically become universal amongst games of these type, where the this little circle symbol here, that represents the rarity of the cards. So that kind of grayish white is common, blue is rare, purple is epic, and then the blazing golden orange is legendary. There are also spells, you can see like Ghost Lightning here, that don't have the symbol, and those are the basic spells. Don't take basic to mean weak, because that's really not what they mean. For example, Chakri Avatar, which you saw just slaughter me just by punching me in the face for 12, is a basic card, but it can be potentially extremely powerful. So basically just by leveling up with each faction, you can unlock, you know, a set of decent minions, but also quite powerful cards. So that's the first way, just leveling up your factions. The second way is by buying Spirit Orbs. Spirit Orbs are Duelyst's version of card packs. Each one will contain 5 cards, and at least one of them is guaranteed to be rare or better. Now, I can't speak from a whole lot of personal experience, but from what I have experienced, and also from reading other players' perspectives on this, Duelyst seems to be a lot more generous in terms of getting higher rarities more often. So I have actually dropped a decent amount of real money and felt like I've gotten my money's worth. There's been a direct connection between spending additional money and seeing vastly improved card quality, because I've been able to just open a lot more packs and because of the higher chance of higher rarities, I've built up a decent collection. Don't feel like you have to pay though. It's entirely reasonable, and this is what I actually did for like a long time, to just play the game a whole bunch. You get gold, which is sort of the in-game currency, through doing quests, just through normal play, as bonuses for doing various things, and you can exchange gold for a Spirit Orb. I'm going to go ahead and do that now just to kind of show you how this works. So having purchased one, I'm going to go down into the opener here and get this super cool orb splitter thing. Alright, so this was a little bit of a lackluster pack despite everything I just, said about higher rarities. So I've gotten 4 commons and then my guaranteed rare. Mesmerize. Cool. So that's basically how opening packs works. You know what? I'm actually a little salty about that one. So I mentioned that there's been one expansion, Denizens of Shimzar. So you can choose to buy orbs from either the core set or the expansion, and I imagine that as expansions continue to come out, they will all have distinct orbs. And so this is one of the ways you can kind of target your purchases to get specific cards. So I'm going to go ahead and buy a Shimzar orb. And let's drag that over here. I am not having good luck today, but that's fine. So you can see now, keyboard holder, but I already have 3 copies. So you can see you can get an entirely different card pool to draw from, essentially, depending on which orbs you buy. Now, oh my, what is going on here? Oh, that's hilarious. Okay. So the sisters, the 7 sisters, which I mentioned Sworn Sister earlier. She's in my current deck. Each faction also has a sister, so six sisters. Say that 6 times fast. 1 for each of the factions, and then Sworn Sister is a neutral for the 7 sisters. These are a special card set. There was a whole lot that went into them. Actually, there was like a whole cryptographic puzzle experience thing they did, which is super cool. But unlike most legendaries, you don't have to open them. You get them by getting 3 copies of all of the rares in the core set for each faction. So I got 3 copies now of every Venar rare in the core set, so I got Wind Sister Maya 3 copies of it. So this is an example of one of these sort of secondary ways you can get cards. So that's cool. The third actual way, or primary way to get cards, going back into the collection screen, involves crafting. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the crafting menu real quick to illustrate. Basically, there's a second currency in the game other than gold, which is spirit. And spirit can be used to craft specific cards that you want for your decks. You can also disenchant cards into spirit, and through that mechanism basically turn things you don't want into things that you do want. Now, the costs for creating and the rewards for disenchanting are the same across rarities. So all epic cards, the purple ones, cost 350 spirit to make and give you 100 spirit back when you disenchant them. So you can see how it takes about 4 epics disenchanted to create a single epic. So economically, this is not a very efficient way to generate cards. The way that I went about it, and I've thought about it, and I think I would recommend this strategy for some players, if you have played enough of the game to know which factions you really like, and in particular to know if there are any factions you really don't like, you can sort of prioritize your collection development by picking one or two like trash factions, which for me were Lionar and Abyssian, and just disenchant the crap out of everything that comes your way in those factions and turn it into, you know, epics and legendaries in the factions that you really want to emphasize playing, which is why I've got like a huge collection in Onyxhai and not a single rare, epic, or legendary in Lionar. I think I've disenchanted basically everything. Now, there is one other aspect of crafting. I'm going to go over to the Vanar real quick to illustrate it. You see how some of these cards have this different kind of red and green visual effect going on? These are prismatic cards, which are Duelyst's version of like premium or super rare. The cards behave exactly the same. It is purely a visual effect, and to be totally honest, it's not a visual effect I really like. When you're in the game, they just have this kind of like, again, prismatic-y glow going on with them. So I'm really not super impressed with these. What is cool is that if you want to disenchant them, they count as the next rarity up. So, for example, an ordinary white asp would cost 900 spirit and give me 350 back because it's a legendary. A prismatic white asp costs 1800 to build, which is crazy, but gives me back 900 if I choose to disenchant it, which I could immediately turn into any other legendary that I wanted. Now, this is the only copy of White Asp I have, so I'm not going to disenchant it because ideally I like to get a couple copies of this. But if you're in a situation where you have 3 copies of a card and then you get some additional prismatics, for example, Altered Beast here, I just disenchant those right off the bat. They don't do anything mechanically different, and since I don't like the effect, you know, I'll get the bonus spirit and call it good. If you are more of a collector in personality, which I'm really not, but if you are, this is sort of like the stretch goal, right? Getting the full set of prismatics as well does require either a lot more spirit or a lot more luck in opening packs. So it's a cool thing, I think, for players that are interested in it. I just look at it as a bonus to my spirit generation. Now, so when you want to build something, how does that work? So, like I said, I've got basically all the Onyxhai cards I could ever want, but my sort of second favorite faction, Vanar, there's still quite a few things that I could stand to pick up. So, I really like a third copy of an Iceblade Dryad, which is an epic. So, I'm going to go ahead and craft it. And there you go. I went from 2 to 3. And I've got a massive stockpile of spirit because I was able to disenchant just like a crap load of stuff during the Shimzar pre-release. So, you know, I'm in pretty good space as far as crafting things go. When you're starting out, this is one of the like really less efficient ways of doing this, and I would really recommend, until you have a pretty good sense of what kinds of factions, and in particular what kinds of decks you like to play, I don't recommend disenchanting things willy-nilly. There are some cards that I think most players would agree are just trash, but for the most part, right, because of the economics of disenchanting, it's always better to open a card from a pack than it is to trade in other things for it. So, when in doubt, I recommend not burning the cards. Just hold on to them. You might find a need for them later, and if not, you know, it's fine. One other thing to note, because you can only play 3 copies of a card in a deck at any time, Duelyst does have a handy disenchant extras thing. So you just click that, and if you have any copies of cards over 3, so like if you've managed to open 5 copies of Snow Rippler for whatever reason, you can just hit that and it automatically disenchants all the extras, which is very convenient. So, that is how you improve your collection. There are a couple other ways to get cards, like I said. You can either do like the Sisters thing, or if you play Gauntlet mode, you get bonus cards as like a reward for Gauntlet. But for the most part, you're looking at unlocking basic cards through progression, opening Spirit Orbs, and then doing collection building using Spirit and disenchanting and stuff. So, with all that, I will follow up with a video of how well the retweaked Onyxhai deck works on the ladder. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.